This is the Maserati MC20 in Bianco Audis, and this is a diecast opening model. The last time I did a review or a show off of the MC20, one was sealed and the other was resin, and I made a observation when I did the review on the opening diecast model that I compared it to my sealed version, and I felt like the sizes were a little bit off. And so I did mention I was going to do a comparison of these two, and obviously if you read the title of this video, then you know that that's what this is going to be about. But this particular one is fairly new for BBR, this color anyway. And again, this being a fully opening model, you definitely have the advantages of the parts being able to open, so you can see more of the detail of the engine and everything else. And so that's what we have here. What we are going to talk about today is that comparison that I did promise that I would do months ago. And so let's just hop right into it. There are going to be obvious differences of these two cars because of the fact that they were made by two different factories. So really the point of this is not necessarily to distinguish the differences, because obviously there's going to be differences, but whether or not those differences make the model better or more accurate or more appealing to the observer. And so of course on the left you do have the resin sealed model, and the front grills, the perforated grills, very well done as usual by BBR. And one thing you notice right away just from the two, the mesh, or maybe it is actually the heat exchanger that was used for both of these, may be brighter on the opening model, or the mesh on the resin model is thicker and you don't see it as much. And again, I think it's personal taste as to which one that you would actually prefer, as opposed to one being better than the other. You have the trident on the BBR resin, and that is a photo etched piece, and I do like the finish on that piece. The trident on the opening looks more like a cut plastic piece, so that's why the chrome, or the clarity I would say, of the two is a little bit different. And it seems like the clarity on the resin model is definitely more present. The carbon fiber on these models is virtually identical. There really isn't that much of a difference. They both look great. As you can see, the lip on the resin model is slightly behind what I'll call the mouth of the car, or the front end, whereas the diecast, you can see the lip is slightly in front of that mouth. Again, just slight differences, but yeah, excellent work on both of these when it comes to the carbon fiber. You have the differences in the front emblem that sits on the front of the nose. The opening model is larger than the one on the resin model. Observe the headlights. The one on the left being again the resin, definitely I think has a little more clarity for the lens. You can see much more detail of the light and the bulb, or the LED I should say, versus the one on the right, which again would be the opening model. If you pull in very close, you can see on the housing the lettering for Maserati in the lens, and you have the outline with the front LEDs, which would be these here, and of course the ones on the very top of the lens as well. So again, it's very detailed when you think about it, and you see these different layers of the components of this light. Moving over to the housing for the Diecast model, has all the same elements, but again, note the difference in the clarity. You do see the Maserati script on the light, and it is legible, but not as legible as the Resin model. And again, you do have the LEDs, but again, they're just not as defined. And I think some of that has to do with the actual lens itself, the material that was used. It seems like the plastic on the opening model is thicker than the one that was used on the Resin model. Observing the back of both of these models, again, very similar. You'll notice right away that the lens on the opening model is a bit darker than the Resin model, only in that the lighter LEDs you can see clearly from this darkened lens, whereas the closed model or opening model, it's a lot more subtle. It's there, but it's subtle, and it just goes again to personal preference as to which one you actually like better. The exhaust outlets are actually colored. In other words, they are more of a silver color versus the total blacked out exhaust outlet on the Resin model. It always goes back to personal preference again. The exhaust outlet is a little bit deeper than the Resin, not by much, but there is definitely that difference. And just like with the front, it seems like the mesh is a lot tighter for their perforated grills on the Resin model versus the ones that are on the opening model. So again, you get to see a little bit more detail beyond that mesh on the opening model. Maserati script is virtually identical between the two. The license plate, the MC20, there's actually, this piece is flat on, well, it's not flat, but it sits on top of the bumper, whereas the one on the Resin model also sits on top, but it is significantly thinner. So again, these are just differences that I'm not suggesting one's better than the other. They're just differences. But both the carbon fiber work, just like the front end, is absolutely beautiful. The side markers darker on the opening model versus, again, the Resin. Again, there's no stark difference in the engine detail either, with, of course, the obvious is the back of this opening. You can actually open it and see more of the engine detail, but they look identical. You will notice, and I've said this already a few times, that the perforated grills on the side here are definitely, and you can see through them, so it's not like you can't, but they're just, the pattern's much tighter than what you see on the opening model. And with the opening model, again, because it is not as tight, you can actually see through it and see some more of that engine detail. It goes for the two in the back as well. Here you have on the Resin model the perforated grill that is for the ducting for the engine. Very nice. I like the fact that you have two pieces here, two separate pieces, and the pattern of the perforated grill is different for each portion. I really do like that a lot. You can't see a lot beyond this for the obvious reasons I stated before. The trident is very nice. It's a, looks like a photo etched piece as well. And as you're going to see when I move over to the opening model, same thing. This trident just has more definition. It's more defined than what you see on the opening model. Moving over to the opening model, you do have the trident, and as I said, and this is not a real criticism, it's just a difference. It's just the clarity on the resin model just seems to be a little bit better. And then you of course have those two different perforated grills. All right, this is your true side-to-side comparison of the two cars. And some of you may recall when I first reviewed this sealed model, I made an observation that I felt like the sealed version seemed to be longer or flatter than the die-cast version. Well, I did take a ruler out and measure it, and you can obviously see from the side-to-side comparison, the length of the two are exactly the same. They're exactly the same. The width as well, because that was another thing. Actually, my wife made that observation and said that she thought that the resin model was wider, but again, we took the measurements and they're exactly the same width. So I think the base plays a small part in the width looking wider, but I also realize now this one having the black top, I think that's what made it look like this one was flatter than the die-cast opening model. I think that's really what it was. So it's more of a quote-unquote illusion more than anything else. So I just wanted to get that out. So as you can see, these again are very similar models. They're very similar cars, with the exception of the obvious. And just some differences that I noticed right away is one, there's no side markers on the resin model, so you don't see that at all there. I mentioned that the lip on the front of the models was a little bit different, and you can see a little more of the black exposed on the die-cast opening one versus the non-opening one as well. The disc brakes, the disc on the resin model is bigger, and I do like that because it just makes the wheel look a lot more filled in versus the one on the top. As far as the color preferences, that's really your preference. I do like the idea that these are blue because I think they match the blue hue. The red is a contrasting thing. So again, personal preference. As I said, the carbon fiber is virtually the same. They're definitely even when it comes to that. The rear discs are about the same. Well, actually, no, the rear disc in the back of the resin model is a little bit wider or larger than the one on the die-cast. What I did notice is that the emergency brake on the die-cast is present. There is not one present on the resin model, so that is missing. The rear pillar window, the opening die-cast is slightly slant, whereas the resin is a little bit wider and it's straight up. So those do definitely have a different look to them. The rear wheel of the resin model, as you can see, there's tons of detail on this wheel. It's a very well detailed wheel. Not only do you see the prominent trident in the center cap, but also the bolts. You can clearly see the bolts. They almost look like they could actually be removed. That's how well defined it is. The disc in the back has plenty of detail. You see all the little mechanisms and parts of that disc back there. Observing the rear wheel of the resin model, you can see there's a lot of detail on this wheel. You have, of course, your valve stem there. You have your hub, and you have this prominent trident. The thing I really like is that the bolts, you can see them. They almost look like you could remove them. You obviously can't, but man, this is really good detail. And then, of course, you have the disc in the back, and you can see the little parts and components as well. Observing the rear wheel of the die-cast opening model, you could probably tell right away, even though the detail is there, it's just not as clear. It's not as well defined. You do have the trident there, just like the other one. You do have the 5-bolt pattern lugs, but again, these look more infused in with the rest of the wheel as opposed to being separated. There is a valve stem, just like the resin model, and of course you have the disc in the back. it's a smaller disc, and there's that missing emergency brake that's on this one versus it missing on the Resin model. Here you have the front wheel of the die-cast opening model, and lots of detail, just like the rear wheel. Again, just not as defined as the Resin model. And here you have the Resin model front wheel, and man, right away you can tell the differences. It's just a lot more clear, from the bolts to the trident. Even the silver paint that outlines the wheel is definitely a little bit clearer than what you would see on the die-cast model. Let's just move really quickly up so you can capture that difference. Here's A, and there's B. Minor things that I've noticed in the differences is that with the MC20 script on the Resin model, it's a little more sunk in versus the die-cast model where it's just poking out, I guess, a little bit more. Again, carbon fiber pattern is virtually the same on both of these. It's really not that much of a difference at all. Viewing the interior steering wheel of the Resin model, as you could see, man, this is extremely well defined. I mean, we're this close magnification to this wheel, and there is nice detail. You can actually see the phone button, and you could tell it's the phone button. You can see the shape of the phone. You move over to the center console, same thing, lots of detail. The seat pattern is beautiful. The door card, again, very beautiful. You see the stitched seat belt. And then on the back of the headrest, of course, you have the trident. Because the die-cast is opening, you obviously have more access to the interior, and that's exactly what you see here. If you're steering wheel, all the pretty much the same components. You do have the buttons on the steering wheel. You do have the what I call it, reflective material for the displays, which is really nice. You can see the Maserati right there, and you have your carbon fiber detail, if you're stitching, so it's all there. You can actually see the pedals. Again, you can see this stuff in the sealed model. It's just a little more difficult. Fantastic detailing when it comes to the seats. You can see the stitching there, and of course it has a stitched seat belt just like the Resin. The door card is fantastic. Just like with the Resin model, you do have the trident on the seat. Again, just a very well detailed seat. Here's the passenger side of the MC20 sealed model. And the one thing I have noticed, that this particular model does not have the reflective material when it comes to the LED displays. As you can see there, it's just blacked out. And I did try it on the other side and to see maybe you could see more of it on the other side, but no, it's pretty much blacked out. So I'm really surprised at that, because on other models, they're sealed models, they do have that reflective material. But I am just fascinated at how detailed at this level, that how clear you can see things. You can see that reverse button, you see the R right there on the panel. I'm just amazed at that. Of course, you have your MC20 emblem there as well. On the opening model here as well, you definitely do have some very nice detailed components. And just like with the panel on the Resin model, you can see the R on this panel as well. Now again, I'm nitpicking a little bit. It's a little bit clearer on the Resin model, but this one actually has a display that you can see. So that is definitely a nice touch. Well, I hope you enjoyed this comparison. I don't do these that often because there's a lot of work involved in doing these comparisons, but I do enjoy the end result. This die-cast versus Resin argument is going to go on. This is not going to be the end of it, and I know that. Both models have their advantages and disadvantages. Let's start with the die-cast model. The advantages are obvious. It's an opening model. You have exposure to all the parts. It's a beautiful thing. This model also has a workable suspension and steering wheels, if you didn't know. I didn't go over all that, only because I did a thorough review of the MC20 previously. So if you want to look at that, just look about a year ago. I did a review on that as well. I would say the disadvantages is the fact that it's an opening model. I know that sounds a little weird, but just bear me out here. Opening models have a tendency not to have the greatest shut lines. Of course, there are exceptions to that. In this model, if you do a reality check compared to the real thing, the shut lines are a little bit wider than the real thing. It's not bad by any stretch of imagination, but it's there. The other disadvantages you're going to find sometimes, the more and more you open these models up, the ones that open, the worse the shut lines get. Things start to become unaligned. And yes, you can make some adjustments and try to fix it, but sometimes it's virtually impossible. So that is something to keep in mind. Which brings the advantage of the resin sealed model. Again, if you take an observation or a reality check, the shut lines are much closer to the real thing. Now, they may be a little bit too perfect, but they are closer. And you don't have to worry about things becoming misaligned because they don't open. And for some people, yes, and that includes me in certain situations, that's why I would prefer the resin model. I'm not saying in this case, but in other cases, I would prefer the resin model just for that, because typically it's going to have the better shape. Now, BBR is a higher end model company, so both models are going to be pretty darn good because you're paying a pretty big price for either one of these models, so you definitely do have that. The other advantage of the resin model is, I'm going to use the word clarity. It seems like all of the little things on the resin model were just much more concise and clear, whereas on the die-cast model they were more distorted. That includes the wheels, the interior detail, the photo etched parts throughout the model, the tridents, for example. All of those things were just so much more concise. Oh, and don't forget the headlights were so much more concise on the resin model. Yes, they could have made it better on the die-cast model. They just chose not to do that. I'm pretty sure it has a lot to do with which factories made this. The bottom line, both of these are really great models, and you should be satisfied with either one. In reality, what I like to do is, because I do like both the resin for the reasons I gave you, shape and all that other stuff, in the paint, and an opening model, is because typically, if I can afford it, I'll have a version of each one. That way I can have one displayed open, and then I can have one that's not displayed not open because it can't open, but then the observer would have a good idea of what the car looks like open and closed. And I just think that's a better representation of that particular car when you can do both. If I only had one choice of one, yeah, I would definitely do the opening model. But again, that is not with all models, because there are some horrific examples of opening models, and that's probably a video we should just do one day and just make some fun of some of those cars. Please like and subscribe. That is the best way I'm going to know you're enjoying these videos. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you next time.